Sandra's life had changed in an instant. A tragic car accident had taken her parents, leaving her alone in a world that suddenly felt cold and unforgiving. Her only family left was Uncle James, a poor man who struggled to make ends meet in their small village. He tried his best to care for Sandra, but his meager resources were not enough to provide for both of them. After the mourning period ended, Aunt Kathy, Sandra's mother's sister, came from the city to pay her respects. She was a woman of means, with a fine house and a life filled with luxury. One evening, after dinner, Kathy sat down with Uncle James and offered to take Sandra with her to the city. "You know, James," Kathy began, her voice smooth and persuasive, "I can give Sandra the life she deserves. She'll go to a good school, have nice clothes, and grow up in a comfortable home. You can't possibly give her what she needs here." Uncle James, with a heavy heart, knew she was right. He didn't want to send Sandra away, but he couldn't bear the thought of her suffering in poverty. He agreed, and a few days later, Sandra was packed and ready to leave the only home she had ever known. As they left the village, Sandra clung to her uncle, tears streaming down her face. "Uncle James, please don't make me go," she pleaded. "It's for your own good, my dear," Uncle James said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Aunt Kathy will take care of you." The ride to the city was long and silent. Sandra stared out of the window, her heart heavy with sadness and fear. She didn't know what awaited her in this new life, but she hoped that her aunt would be kind and loving. When they arrived at Kathy's grand house in the city, Sandra's awe quickly turned to unease. The house was beautiful, but it felt cold and unwelcoming. Aunt Kathy's demeanor changed almost immediately after they entered the house. She was no longer the caring relative who had promised to take Sandra in. "Kathy," Sandra asked cautiously one day, "when will I start school?" Kathy shot her a cold look. "School? Who said anything about school? You'll be staying here to help with the housework. You should be grateful you're not back in that filthy village." Sandra was shocked. This was not what she had expected. The days passed, and Aunt Kathy's cruelty became more apparent. She forced Sandra to clean the entire house, cook meals, and run errands. If anything was not done to her liking, Kathy would lash out, sometimes locking Sandra in the small, dark storage room as punishment. "You useless girl," Kathy would scream. "You can't do anything right. You're a burden, just like your poor father." Sandra's nights were filled with tears, and her days were spent in fear of making a mistake. She felt trapped in a nightmare, but she had no way to escape. Just before we continue, please subscribe, like and click the notification bell for more. Here is the full story. As Sandra grew older, Kathy's demands became more sinister. One evening, when Sandra was just 16, Kathy called her into the living room. She was dressed in an expensive gown, her makeup heavy and fake smile. "Sandra," Kathy said with a voice dripping in fake sweetness, "it's time you start making money and paying your bills." "What do you mean, Aunt Kathy?" Sandra asked, her heart racing. Kathy's smile widened. "I've found a way for you to make some money. You'll meet some of my friends tonight, and they'll pay you well if you entertain them." Sandra's blood ran cold as she realized what her aunt was suggesting. But I don't want to," she stammered, backing away. Kathy's face twisted into a sneer. "You don't have a choice, Sandra. You live under my roof, and you'll do as I say. If you don't, you'll be out on the streets with nothing." Terrified and with no one to turn to, Sandra was forced into a world she knew nothing about. Kathy introduced her to older, wealthy men who paid for her company, and Sandra was made to endure things that broke her spirit. Every night, when Sandra returned home, Kathy would be waiting. "Where's the money?" she would demand, her eyes glinting with greed. "Don't you dare keep a single penny from me." Sandra would hand over the money, tears in her eyes, pleading with her aunt. "Please, Aunt Kathy, I don't want to do this anymore. Please let me stop." But Kathy would laugh cruelly. "You're good at it, Sandra. Don't be so foolish. You'll make us both rich." As the years passed, Sandra became numb to the life she was forced to live. By the time she was 22, Aunt Kathy had died suddenly from an illness. Sandra felt no sadness, only relief that her tormentor was gone. But by then, the damage was done. Sandra was at the top of the game, known across the city for her beauty and skill. She had both local and international clients, and she would often brag about how good she was. "I'm the best," Sandra would say with a hollow smile. "There's no one like me in this city." But beneath the bravado, Sandra was broken. She longed to escape the life she had been trapped in, but every time she tried, something seemed to pull her back. One day, after a particularly degrading and terrible encounter with a client, Sandra decided she couldn't take it anymore. She packed a small bag, took all the money she had saved, and left the city. She traveled to a distant town, hoping to start a new life. For a few weeks, Sandra managed to stay away. She found a job as a waitress in a small cafe and tried to build a life away from the shadows of her past. But the pull was too strong. She found herself thinking about the money, the pleasure, the luxury, the power she had in the city. The dark spirit within her whispered, luring her back into the life she despised. Unable to resist, Sandra returned to the city and resumed her old ways. Years later, Sandra tried again. This time, she sought the help of a therapist, hoping that talking to someone would help her break free. The therapist was kind and understanding, and for a while, Sandra felt hopeful. But the deep-rooted darkness in her soul refused to let go. One night, after another failed attempt to stay away from the life that haunted her, Sandra broke down in tears. She felt completely hopeless, as if she was trapped in a cycle she could never escape. Sandra had one close friend, Monica, who was also in the same business. Despite their shared lifestyle, Sandra often tried to warn Monica. "Monica," Sandra would say, her voice tinged with sadness, "this life, it's not what we're meant for. We should stop before it's too late." Monica would shrug, not taking her seriously. "We're making good money, Sandra. Why would we stop?" But Sandra knew that money wasn't everything. She longed for something more, something pure and real. One evening, after another failed attempt to quit, Sandra broke down in front of Monica. "Monica," she sobbed, "I can't do this anymore. I've tried to stop, but I can't. It's like something is controlling me, forcing me to keep going back." Monica looked at her friend with concern. "Sandra, if it's really that bad, maybe you should see someone. I've heard about a pastor who they said is really powerful. Maybe he can help." Desperate for a way out, Sandra agreed. The next day, Monica took Sandra to see Pastor John, a man known for his spiritual power. The church was small and humble, but there was a sense of peace that Sandra hadn't felt in years. Pastor John welcomed them warmly and listened as Sandra poured out her heart. She told him everything, how her aunt had forced her into the life she was living, how she had tried to escape but failed, and how she felt like something was controlling her. The pastor listened intently, then spoke in a calm, reassuring voice. "Sandra, there is a dark spirit that has taken hold of you. It entered your life when you were just 19, after an encounter with a wealthy man. This spirit has been controlling your actions, keeping you trapped in this life." Sandra's eyes widened in shock. She had always felt that there was something more, something beyond her control, that was driving her back into the life she hated. Pastor John stood and placed his hands on Sandra's head. He began to pray, his voice strong and filled with authority. Sandra felt a warmth spread through her body, a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The darkness that had plagued her for so long seemed to lift, and for the first time, she felt truly free. As the prayer ended, Sandra collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. But these were not tears of despair, they were tears of relief, of joy. "Thank you," Sandra whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you, Pastor." Pastor John smiled kindly. "The darkness is gone, Sandra. You are free now. But you must stay strong and keep your faith. The enemy will try to pull you back, but you must resist. Surround yourself with the right people and stay close to God." Sandra nodded, her heart filled with a new sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she felt hope. Monica helped Sandra to her feet, and they left the church together. The air outside felt fresher, the sunlight brighter, as if the world had changed in the short time they had been inside. Sandra felt lighter, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Sandra returned to her apartment, but it no longer felt like the place she belonged. The luxurious furniture, the expensive clothes, the reminders of her old life, they all seemed hollow now. She knew she had to start anew, and that meant letting go of everything that tied her to the past. She gathered her things and moved out the very next day, leaving the city that had been both her prison and her stage. With Monica's help, she found a small, modest place in a quieter part of town. It wasn't grand, but it was peaceful, a place where she could heal. Over the next few weeks, Sandra began to rebuild her life. She joined Pastor John's church and threw herself into volunteer work, helping others who were struggling as she once had. The church became her sanctuary, a place where she could find strength and community. Sandra also found work in a local store, where the simple tasks brought her a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and it gave her a chance to start fresh. One evening, after church, Sandra and Monica sat together in Sandra's small kitchen. Monica had noticed the change in her friend and was curious. "Sandra, you seem so different now," Monica said, sipping her tea. "It's like you've found peace." "I wish I could feel that way." Sandra smiled softly. "It wasn't easy, Monica. But after Pastor John prayed for me, I felt like I was finally free from the darkness that was controlling me. I had to let go of everything from my old life and start over. It's hard, but it's worth it." Monica looked down, her expression troubled. "I've been thinking about what you said, about this life not being what we're meant for. Maybe you're right. But I don't know if I can do what you did. It seems so hard." Sandra reached out and took Monica's hand. "It is hard, but you don't have to do it alone. I'll be here for you, and so will Pastor John. It's not too late to change, Monica. You deserve better." Monica nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Maybe I'll come with you to church next Sunday." "I'd like that," Sandra said, squeezing her friend's hand. "You don't have to carry this burden alone." As the months passed, Sandra's life continued to change. She became more involved in the church, leading prayer groups and helping others who were struggling with their own battles. Her story became an inspiration to those who felt trapped in darkness, a testament to the power of faith and the possibility of redemption. Though the memories of her past still lingered, Sandra no longer felt haunted by them. She had found a new purpose, a life filled with love, service, and hope. And every time she stepped into the church, she was reminded of the day she was set free. Sandra knew that her journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and temptation. But she was no longer alone. She had found a community that supported her, a faith that sustained her, and a strength within herself that she never knew she had. Years later, Sandra stood at the front of the church, speaking to a group of young women who had come seeking help. She told them her story, not with shame, but with honesty and hope. "When I was lost," Sandra said, her voice steady and strong, "I thought there was no way out. But I was wrong. There is always a way out, no matter how deep you've fallen. You just have to believe, and you have to be willing to let go of the things that hold you back." The women listened, their eyes wide with understanding. Sandra could see herself in them, the fear, the pain, and the longing for something more. "And remember," Sandra added, her gaze sweeping across the room, "you're not alone. There are people who care about you, who want to help you. Don't be afraid to reach out. Your past doesn't define you. What you choose to do today, that's what matters." As the meeting ended and the women began to leave, one of them approached Sandra with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You've given me hope." Sandra smiled warmly, her heart filled with compassion. "That's all I wanted. Remember, you're stronger than you think." As she watched the young woman leave, Sandra felt a deep sense of peace. She had come full circle, from a girl lost in darkness to a woman shining a light for others to follow. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led her to a place of healing and purpose. And in that moment, Sandra knew that she was finally free. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more on my channel.